When fans of The Walking Dead are asked to name some of the most terrifying villains in the series, one figure almost always comes to mind: Negan. Now, his introduction remains one of the most shocking in television history, with his leather jacket and his barbed wire bat named Lucille, and the grin that carried both charm and menace throughout the entire series. The moment he lined Rick's group up, put them on their knees, and swung a bat into two of our most beloved characters truly set the tone for who he really was, and it was permanently engraved in our memory as the audience everywhere. To most, this was the very definition of villainy. He was a cruel man who was methodical and meticulous about his ideas and his decisions. Negan wasn't simply just another survivor, yet he was more of a man who broke heroes' hearts much more than a Walker could. But as the years went on, and as the series peeled back the layers of his character, the truth became much harder to define. Negan wasn't the real villain. He was something else entirely. A man shaped by the collapse of civilization, a leader who blurred the lines between saviors and tyrants, and perhaps the most human reflection of what survival truly meant in this world. Negan's first appearance paints him in the darkest possible light. The lineup scene where Glenn and Abraham are executed in front of their friends cemented who he was at the start. He taunted Rick's group and even toyed with their emotions, even while swinging his bat, Lucille, without hesitation. To the audience, he was just another psychotic villain, the man who had gone too far. But as you look further into Negan's actions, he was only looking to show his power, because rather than killing, he was just a cold-hearted murderer. But in his mind, fear was the foundation of order. When he executed Glenn and Abraham, Negan was setting the rules of his world in stone. Cross him, resist him, and you would die. Or you would live with his brutal torture. To understand why Negan cannot be reduced to a cartoon villain, you have to look in the system he had built. The survivors were not merely a gang or marauders terrorizing weaker groups. They were an army, more like a government, and an economy rolled into one. Negan's communities were built in tribute. Every group under his watch was required to give a portion of their resources. And in exchange, they were spared destruction and given protection. It was taxation at the edge of the blade. Yet, from a purely structural perspective, it worked. Walkers were not enough to threaten the sanctuary. Internal rebellion was rare. Negan created stability where chaos might have otherwise consumed everything. It was complete tyranny. And yes, it was also an order. But in a world without governments and without laws, without any unifying code of conduct, Negan has crafted his own brutal, oppressive, and unforgiving but functional rules. What makes Negan so unsettling is not simply his cruelty, but how close he resembles the show's heroes. Rick Grimes was the hero of The Walking Dead, the man audiences were told to root for, the face of survival and leadership. But if you dig deeper and you look closer, Rick killed men without hesitation when his group was threatened, and he also executed ones that he thought were dangerous to the community. He tore out a man's throat with his teeth when cornered. He led raids against rival groups, slaughtered them in their sleep. Negan, on the other hand, killed only when it reinforced him to. Both men ruled through violence, but both were willing to sacrifice anything for the sake of their people. The differences were very well presented. Rick was framed as a desperate father protecting his family, while Negan was framed as the bully. But in truth, the line between them was paper thin. This comparison was not accidental, as the writers of The Walking Dead deliberately positioned Negan and Rick's reflections. Negan commanded through fear, while Rick commanded through loyalty. Negan relied on charisma and his sharp wit and raw intimidation, while Rick relied on empathy, desperation, and the hope that his followers believed he still represented something good. Yet both were willing to cross every line when pushed. And when Rick hatcheted enemies into pieces or orchestrated entire massacres to eliminate threats, we called it survival. But when Negan did the same thing, we called it villainy. The real horror was not Negan's brutality, but the realization that the hero was never far from becoming him. What truly separated Negan from every other villain in The Walking Dead is his ability to change. The Governor was never reformed, Alpha never regretted, Gareth and the cannibals of Terminus died as monsters, But Negan was completely different. As he was stripped away from power and locked in a cell for years, Negan had time to reflect on all the things he had done. He even saved Judith, who was Rick's daughter. He risked his life to kill Alpha, then dismantling the Whisperers. He showed loyalty to the communities that once hated him. Most of all, he developed bonds, especially a bond with Maggie, who was the widow of Glenn, the man who was killed in front of his wife by Negan himself with his bat Lucille. Now, Negan never lost his edge. He still had his sense of evilness, as he was still dangerous. He was still a man who could destroy if he needed to, but he became powerless over time. His relationship with Maggie and her son Herschel is perhaps the strongest example of this complexity. Maggie had every reason to hate Negan. He was the man who murdered Glenn, the love of her life, and the father of her child, yet over time, Negan proved himself in actions rather than words. He never begged for forgiveness, or he never had an excuse for what he had done. Rather, he carried the weight of it, knowing nothing else could erase it, and still chose to act differently. He became a living contribution to the group, a man who was both a villain and something closer to a reluctant ally. So if Negan was not the real villain, who was? Some might point to the governor, who completely massacred entire communities and even killed his own group and ruled with paranoia. Others might say Alpha, who revealed in savagery and treated humans' lives as nothing but fuel for her philosophy. Still, others may argue that the show's endless parade of antagonists like Terminus, the Reapers, the Commonwealth, they each represented a darker side of humanity. The truth is more unsettling. The real villain of The Walking Dead was never any single character. Rather, it was just the world itself. As the collapse of civilization and the hunger of the dead, and the way of endless survivors being stripped away from their morality and dignity and humanity, it was the system that forced every leader like Rick, Negan, Maggie, the governor, and so much more to compromise until no one was clean. Negan embodied this truth more than anybody else. He was brutal because the world demanded brutality. He was controlling because chaos devoured the weak. He was violent because peace had no place in the apocalypse. Negan was not an anomaly, he was the logical outcome of the world where civilization had fallen. This is what makes him terrifying. Not because he was different from the others, rather it was because he was just like them. He was what anyone could come given power, fear, and desperation. In the end, Negan was never the monster we thought he was. He was not like the governor who was drunk on control. He was not Alpha who lived with the dead. He was not even Shane who spiraled into jealousy and paranoia. Negan was just a man trying to survive to get his revenge and peace. He was a complicated man who did terrible things, but for reasons he could justify to himself. And somehow, against all odds, he was also a man capable of change. So was Negan the villain of The Walking Dead? No, not at all. His appearance was definitely something hated in The Walking Dead, but it was never the reason to ever make him be the villain. True villains never change who they are in the show. As for Negan, him being the villain never justified who he was. This is why Negan remains so compelling, because the dangerous man in The Walking Dead was never truly its villain. He was proof that in a world without order is not fully destroyed, but more so rewritten by actions. Now listen, if you enjoyed this video, please consider giving me a like, and I'll see you in the next one. Adios, amigos!